She had always been different from most of the people around her. While others laughed loudly at every joke, she often preferred quiet corners and small moments of thought. She watched people, not to judge but to understand. There was a calm determination in her, something people sometimes noticed, though they rarely spoke of it. Most of the time, that determination went unnoticed, buried under the ordinary routines of life. It was a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business. Life moved slowly, and people tended to follow the same paths their parents had walked. Doing something out of the ordinary was often met with suspicion or ridicule. And so when she decided to take on a challenge that no one had dared to attempt before, it drew attention, but not the kind she hoped for. The moment she announced her intentions, laughter erupted. It wasn't cruel at first, just casual, the kind of laughter people let slip when they didn't know how to respond. "Are you serious?" someone asked, shaking their head with a smirk. Others nodded in agreement, some whispering under their breath, some openly mocking. They didn't understand why anyone would want to try what she was planning. To them, it seemed reckless, foolish even. She felt the sting of their words, but she did not let it break her spirit. Instead, she kept her eyes steady and her voice calm. "I am serious," she said simply. "I want to try." Her words were clear, yet they seemed to float above the crowd, unheard by most. They didn't see the courage it took just to say it aloud. Over the next few days, the town became a quiet stage for whispers and sideways glances. People who had once ignored her now watched with curiosity. Though some of that curiosity was tinged with scorn, they had stories ready about why she would fail. Some said she didn't have the strength, some said she didn't have the experience, and some just shook their heads, unable to understand why she would risk embarrassment. At home, she prepared quietly. She spent long hours thinking about every step she would take, every obstacle she might face. She imagined herself succeeding and she imagined herself failing. Both were frightening in their own ways, but she refused to let fear control her. Each day she felt a little stronger, a little more certain that this was something she had to do, not for the applause, not for the approval, but because she believed it was the right thing to try. The night before her challenge, she could hardly sleep. Her mind ran through endless scenarios. People laughing, people judging, people shaking their heads in disappointment. These images tried to press on her courage. Yet beneath it all there was a quiet flame, small but steady, reminding her that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it. The morning came, crisp and clear. She walked through the streets of her town, noticing faces that had once been indifferent now turned toward her. Some eyes were curious, some skeptical, and some openly mocking. Yet she did not falter. She walked with a purpose, each step carrying the weight of her own determination. She could feel the whispers following her, the soft laughter that tried to chip away at her resolve. But she also felt something else, something stronger, the knowledge that she was ready. Her first steps toward the challenge were small, almost ordinary. But to her they were monumental. She felt every muscle in her body tense with anticipation, every breath a reminder of what was at stake. She knew that this was not just about the task itself. It was about showing herself that courage could exist even in the face of ridicule. People gathered, some by chance, some deliberately, to watch. They didn't know if she would succeed or fail, but they were certain of one thing: it would be entertaining, and most of them expected failure. A few hidden among the crowd felt a flicker of curiosity that they couldn't explain. They didn't laugh and they didn't mock, but they watched closely, wondering what would happen. She paused for a moment, feeling the weight of all the eyes upon her. The laughter from the crowd felt like tiny arrows aimed to weaken her resolve. But she breathed deeply, grounding herself. She remembered every quiet hour of preparation, every small victory of practice, every moment she had faced her own doubts. She realized that their laughter could not touch the inner strength she had built. Then she took a step forward. The first step was the hardest, the one that would set the tone for everything else. She could feel the tension in the air, the way people leaned forward, waiting to see what would happen. And she moved with intention, steady and sure, not reckless, not hurried. Each step carried a story of preparation, of quiet courage, of belief in herself. The laughter didn't stop at first. It was louder now, fueled by the absurdity they believed she embodied. "She'll never make it," someone shouted, and others echoed similar words. But with each step their voices grew slightly less certain. There was something in the way she moved, something in the calm determination that was hard to dismiss completely. She encountered small obstacles almost immediately. Uneven ground, tricky turns, the unexpected difficulty of the path she had chosen. Each one tested her, and each one demanded focus. She could feel her heart pounding, her muscles straining, but she did not stop. She had imagined these moments in her mind countless times, but living them was a different experience altogether. She felt fear, but fear did not control her. It sharpened her senses, reminding her that courage was not the absence of fear. A few people in the crowd began to whisper among themselves, their mocking voices softening into cautious curiosity. They had seen many attempts before, and most ended in failure. Yet there was something different here. She moved with a purpose that could not be ignored, and even those who doubted her had to admit, quietly to themselves, that she was brave. As the hours passed, she continued her effort, small victories stacking upon one another. She learned to adjust, to think quickly, to use her mind as well as her body. Each success, however minor, fueled her confidence. She remembered all the times she had been laughed at, all the moments she had been dismissed, and she felt a quiet satisfaction that she was proving something, not to them but to herself. By midday, the mockery began to lose its edge. The crowd that had come to scoff now watched in a different way. There was still some laughter, some disbelief, but mixed with it was admiration, however grudging. People began to lean in, trying to understand how she managed to continue despite the obvious challenges. They whispered among themselves, sometimes asking questions, sometimes expressing disbelief that she could endure so much. She did not notice all of them. She was focused on the challenge, on the steps she had to take, on the obstacles that still lay ahead. Her mind worked in small increments, planning each movement carefully, adjusting when needed. She felt the strain, yes, but also the thrill of facing something that tested her in every way. The task was hard, exhausting, and often frightening, but she moved forward because she had chosen to. By the evening, she had achieved something remarkable. Not everything was perfect, and there were moments she stumbled, moments that could have ended her effort, but she had continued. And in continuing, she had transformed the perception of those around her. People who had mocked her now looked on with a mix of awe and envy. They could not deny the courage it took to face such a challenge, especially when the world had doubted her from the beginning. As she finally stopped to rest, she did not look for applause. She did not need it. She had faced her fear, endured the judgment of others, and proven to herself that courage was something she carried inside, independent of approval or recognition. The whispers of the crowd were a distant echo now. She had discovered something deeper, something quiet, powerful, and entirely her own. That night, as she walked home, the streets seemed quieter, calmer. She felt the weight of the day, the exhaustion in her muscles, the ache in her mind. Yet beneath it all, there was a glowing sense of accomplishment. She had faced ridicule, fear, and doubt, and she had endured. She had discovered the first taste of true courage, not the kind that others celebrate, but the kind that grows quietly within, often unnoticed, but unshakable. Even as people continued to talk about her the next day, some laughing, some questioning, some admiring, she moved forward without concern. The judgment of others no longer held power over her. She had learned that courage was not a performance. It was a choice repeated over and over, even when no one was watching, and she knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge her in ways she could not yet imagine. For the first time in her life, she felt a quiet confidence that did not need validation. She had faced the mockery, and it had not broken her. She had taken the first step, and with it, she had begun a path that would define her in ways far beyond what anyone else could understand. And so, as night fell over the small town, the young woman rested, aware that the world around her would continue to talk, to mock, to question, but she carried within her a flame that could not be extinguished, a quiet bravery that no words could diminish. The first part of her journey had ended, but the story of her courage was only beginning. The next morning arrived with a quiet stillness that seemed almost impossible after the events of the previous day. The town was stirring slowly, unaware of how much had changed in the life of the young woman. She woke before sunrise, her body still tired from the exertion, but her mind already alert and focused. The challenge she had begun yesterday was far from over. Today would test her in ways she had only imagined. She prepared herself carefully, moving through familiar routines with extra attention. Every step mattered, every decision counted. She did not rush, though her heart was quickened by the anticipation of what lay ahead. There was a nervous energy in the air, but unlike fear, this was the kind that sharpened her senses, made her feel alive, and reminded her that she was capable of more than most people gave her credit for. As she walked toward the place where the challenge awaited, the streets seemed different. The sun was rising, casting long shadows on the walls and pavements. A few early risers noticed her, but instead of the casual mockery that had followed her yesterday, there was something in their eyes that they could not hide: curiosity. Some whispered to each other, questioning how she had managed to endure what they had witnessed. Others shook their heads, unconsciously admitting that her actions had impressed them even if they would never say it aloud. The path she was taking was not easy. She had chosen it herself, knowing that it would push her limits, and that is exactly what it was doing. There were moments when the ground was uneven, when her muscles ached from yesterday's exertion, and when the anticipation of what was to come threatened to overwhelm her. Yet she pressed on. Each step was deliberate, a small act of bravery that added to the larger picture of her journey. She remembered the faces of those who had mocked her. Their laughter echoed in her mind, but instead of letting it hurt her, she turned it into fuel. Each sneer, each doubtful look became a reminder of why she had to keep going. She wasn't doing this to prove them wrong, not exactly. She was doing this to prove to herself that fear and ridicule could not control her life. She had learned that courage was quiet, not loud or showy, and it was something that grew stronger the more it was exercised. Along the way, she encountered a few people who tried to discourage her. "It's too hard for you," one of them said, a smirk on their face. Another added, "Why don't you just stop? You'll embarrass yourself if you keep going." The words were meant to wound, but she felt a calm clarity instead. She nodded politely without argument and continued forward. Their mockery could not stop her. Their doubt could not dictate her actions. She had made a decision, and that decision was hers alone. The challenge became more difficult as the morning passed. There were obstacles she had not fully anticipated, moments when she had to think quickly, adjust, and even risk small mistakes to continue. Her body ached, and her mind raced with the calculations of each step. She stumbled a few times, but each stumble was met with determination to rise again. She learned quickly that persistence mattered more than perfection, that moving forward despite mistakes was the real measure of courage. Some of the townspeople began to gather again, drawn by curiosity more than anything else. They whispered among themselves, watching her carefully, unsure whether to laugh or admire. The laughter of yesterday had faded for some, replaced with an unspoken respect they couldn't quite put into words. A few of them tried to step closer to offer advice, but she gently shook her head, signaling that she needed to do this her way. It was a delicate balance. She wanted to succeed on her own terms, and that required focus and independence. The hours passed slowly. She worked steadily, feeling exhaustion building with every step. Her legs trembled, her arms ached, and yet she refused to stop. In moments of weakness, she closed her eyes briefly, reminding herself why she had started. Courage, she realized, was not the absence of struggle. It was the decision to face struggle even when it seemed impossible. She had experienced small victories yesterday, but today was proving that courage was not a single act. It was a continuous process, a choice she had to make again and again. At one point, she encountered an obstacle that seemed almost insurmountable. A steep incline blocked her path, and for a moment doubt crept in. She paused, placing her hands on her knees, breathing heavily. The voices in her mind were louder than the voices outside. "Maybe you can't do this," they whispered. Maybe they were right. But then she remembered the preparation, the quiet determination that had carried her this far. She took a deep breath and began to climb, step by step, focusing not on the end but on the movement itself. Each motion was deliberate, a combination of strength and patience. The crowd that had gathered watched in silence now. Some of the onlookers had begun to understand that she was not simply acting recklessly. She was using thought, care, and courage all at once. They exchanged glances, whispering their disbelief. "She's really going to do it," one said quietly. Another shook their head, unsure whether to feel admiration or envy. For the first time, some of the people who had mocked her were realizing that bravery could not be measured by appearances alone. As she continued, small moments of triumph gave her energy. Reaching the top of the incline, navigating tricky terrain, and overcoming each unexpected difficulty reminded her that she was capable of more than she had known. She smiled briefly to herself, a small acknowledgement of her strength. The feeling was not pride in a boastful sense. It was quiet satisfaction, a deep understanding that persistence and courage were paying off. Despite her progress, the challenge was far from over. There were still obstacles ahead, moments when the path seemed unclear or impossible. But with every step she felt more certain that she could overcome them. The fear that had whispered in her ear yesterday was still present, but it had lost its power. She had learned that courage did not mean the absence of fear. It meant facing fear, moving through it and continuing even when the outcome was uncertain. Along the way, a few people tried to offer help, but she politely declined. This journey was hers to make, and while support could be appreciated, it could not replace the act of facing the challenge herself. She had to discover her own strength, trust her own judgment, and rely on her own courage. It was a lesson she had learned over time, quietly, in moments of reflection and preparation, and it was being tested now in the most vivid way. By late afternoon, the crowd had grown larger, drawn by word of mouth and curiosity. Some who had mocked her were still present, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and surprise. Others had come to watch without judgment, simply intrigued by the determination she displayed. She did not notice all of them. Her focus was inward on the task itself, on the small victories and careful steps that made up the day's journey. She encountered moments that tested not only her physical strength, but her patience and resolve. Small setbacks threatened to derail her progress, but she adjusted quickly, learning to accept mistakes without letting them stop her. She reminded herself that courage was not measured by flawless performance, but by the ability to continue despite difficulty. Each minor victory built on the last, creating a sense of momentum that carried her forward. The sun began to descend toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the path. Fatigue was creeping into her body, but her mind remained alert. She had learned to pace herself, to breathe steadily, and to focus on each movement. The challenge was no longer about impressing others. It was about proving to herself that she could endure, adapt, and persist. At one point, she looked back briefly at the path she had traveled. The incline she had conquered, the obstacles she had navigated, and the small moments of triumph were all visible in her mind's eye. She realized that courage was not something that could be measured by a single action or a single day. It was cumulative, built over time, and strengthened by every choice to continue despite fear or doubt. As evening approached, she faced the final part of the challenge for the day. It was demanding and required every ounce of focus and energy she had. Her body ached, her muscles trembled, but she pressed on. She could hear the crowd now, not in the mocking way of yesterday, but in quiet anticipation. Even those who had doubted her began to sense the determination that drove her forward. They did not understand it fully, but they could see its effects. Finally, she completed the day's portion of the challenge. She stopped, breathing heavily, feeling every ache and strain in her body. The sun was low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She had faced fear, overcome obstacles, and endured ridicule, and yet she had continued. There was no applause, no fanfare, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had done what she set out to do. As she walked home, her mind replayed the events of the day. She thought about the moments of doubt, the obstacles, the small victories, and the perseverance that had carried her through. She realized that this journey was not only about the challenge itself, but about discovering the strength she had carried within her all along. Courage, she understood now, was quiet, persistent, and deeply personal. That night, as she rested, she felt the exhaustion settle into her body, but there was also a sense of quiet triumph. She had faced fear, mockery, and difficulty, and she had endured. She knew that the challenge was far from over, but she had taken another crucial step, and with each step, her courage grew stronger, quietly transforming her into someone she had always hoped to be, a person who could face anything, no matter the doubt or ridicule of others. The next morning arrived with a crisp chill in the air. She awoke before dawn, as she had done the day before, her body sore from the effort but her mind sharp and focused. Today was the day she would face the most difficult part of her journey. The obstacles she had overcome before were nothing compared to what awaited her. She knew this, and yet a quiet excitement filled her chest. Fear was there, of course, but it no longer held the power to paralyze her. She dressed quickly, choosing practical clothes that allowed freedom of movement. Every small detail mattered. Footwear that would grip the ground, sleeves rolled to prevent snagging, hair tied neatly so it would not distract her. She had learned from the previous day that preparation was as important as courage. It was not enough to simply try. She had to move with intention, with thought, and with persistence. As she stepped outside, the town was beginning to stir. The early light cast long shadows across the streets, painting the buildings in soft gold. A few people were already awake, taking notice of her presence. Some remembered the events of yesterday, and there were whispers that followed her as she walked. This time, the words were not purely mocking. Curiosity, skepticism, and even admiration were mixed together in a way that was impossible to ignore. She reached the starting point of today's challenge, taking a moment to survey the path ahead. The terrain was more difficult than she had anticipated. Steep inclines, uneven surfaces, and unexpected obstacles lay in wait. Her heart raced, not with fear but with anticipation. She knew she would have to rely on every skill she had, every ounce of strength and patience she could summon. The challenge ahead was demanding, but she felt ready. The first steps were careful, deliberate. She moved with precision, feeling the ground beneath her feet, adjusting to every change in the terrain. She remembered the lessons of the previous days. Focus on the moment, take one step at a time, and do not let doubt creep in. It was a delicate balance, requiring both physical skill and mental control. One misstep could lead to failure, but she refused to let that possibility stop her. As she progressed, she encountered her first significant obstacle. A narrow path twisted sharply between two large rocks. A misstep could send her tumbling, and the thought made her heart race. She paused, assessing the situation carefully. Her fingers brushed against the rough surface of the rocks as she balanced herself. She breathed slowly, imagining each movement before taking it. With careful precision, she moved forward, one foot after the other, until she was safely past the narrow path. The crowd that had gathered began to grow as the morning progressed. People had come to see her, some drawn by curiosity, some by disbelief, and a few by genuine admiration. They whispered among themselves, commenting on her determination, shaking their heads in surprise at her careful movements. Some of those who had mocked her yesterday were now quiet, unsure of how to respond. They had expected failure, but what they saw was far beyond anything they could have anticipated. The next challenge was even more demanding. A steep incline stretched ahead, lined with loose stones that threatened to shift underfoot. Her muscles burned as she began the climb, her hands occasionally gripping the rocks for support. She stumbled briefly, catching herself just in time, and felt the adrenaline surge through her. Every step required focus and courage, and she welcomed the difficulty. It was a test of more than strength. It was a test of patience, determination, and mental clarity. As she climbed, her mind wandered briefly to the faces of those who had doubted her. She did not dwell on their mockery, but she could not ignore the impact it had had on her journey. Their laughter had been a weight she carried, but it had also been a source of motivation. She realized that courage was not simply about facing physical challenges. It was about enduring judgment, criticism, and doubt without losing one's sense of purpose. Reaching the top of the incline, she paused to catch her breath. The view stretched out before her, a mixture of the town she knew and the obstacles she had yet to conquer. She felt a surge of accomplishment, but also an awareness that the hardest part was still ahead. The next section required both agility and strategy. She had to navigate uneven ground, move carefully across narrow ledges, and anticipate unexpected difficulties. It was the kind of challenge that demanded complete focus, and she was ready. She began the descent with caution, carefully placing each foot to avoid slipping. Her hands brushed against the rocks for balance, and she felt the strain in her arms and legs. Every step was a test of endurance and skill. The crowd below watched in silence, their previous whispers replaced with attentive observation. They could see her determination, her careful movements, and the way she persisted despite exhaustion. Even those who had doubted her could not look away. Midway through, she faced a moment that would have defeated many others. A large gap lay before her, requiring her to leap from one ledge to another. She paused, her heart pounding, her breath steady. She measured the distance, visualized the landing, and reminded herself that fear was only an obstacle if she allowed it to be. With a deep breath, she leaped. Time seemed to slow as she sailed through the air, and for a brief moment, doubt tried to creep in. But she landed safely, knees slightly bent, arms steadying her balance. The crowd gasped, some whispering in disbelief, others clapping softly in surprise. The final section of the challenge was a combination of everything she had faced so far. Steep inclines, uneven surfaces, and narrow paths demanded every skill she had. Her body ached, her muscles burned, but she refused to stop. She focused on the rhythm of her movements, the flow of her breath, and the determination that had brought her this far. She reminded herself that courage was not a momentary act. It was sustained effort, repeated choices, and the refusal to give up when the path became difficult. Along the way, she encountered moments of doubt. Her hand slipped on a loose rock. Her foot nearly lost balance on a narrow ledge, and her muscles threatened to give out. Each time she paused, adjusted, and continued. She learned to accept setbacks as part of the journey, understanding that they were not failures but opportunities to demonstrate persistence. Her mind remained focused, her determination unwavering, and her courage grew stronger with every challenge she overcame. The crowd's reactions continued to shift. Those who had come to mock her yesterday now watched in awe. Some tried to offer advice, but she politely declined, signaling that she needed to navigate this path on her own. Others whispered among themselves, acknowledging her bravery quietly, unable to fully express the admiration they felt. The young woman moved with focus, aware of their presence but not distracted by it. Her attention was on the journey, on each careful step, and on the courage that guided her forward. As she neared the end of the path, fatigue threatened to slow her down. Her legs trembled, her arms ached, and her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Yet she pressed on, refusing to let exhaustion dictate her actions. She reminded herself of the preparation, the careful planning, and the small victories that had carried her this far. She had faced fear, mockery, and physical challenges, and she had endured. Now was the time to finish, to prove not to anyone else but to herself that persistence and courage could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Finally, she reached the last stretch, a narrow path leading to the conclusion of the challenge. Her heart pounded, her muscles burned, but she moved steadily, carefully, and with intention. Each step was deliberate, each movement a testament to the courage she had built over the past days. The crowd watched in silence, captivated by the determination and strength she displayed. Even those who had doubted her could not hide their astonishment. She took the final step and reached the end. A wave of relief and triumph washed over her. She had faced the most difficult part of the challenge and succeeded. There was no loud applause, no fanfare, only the quiet acknowledgement of what she had accomplished. She had faced fear, obstacles, and doubt, and she had emerged stronger. The journey had tested every aspect of her courage, and she had proven to herself that she was capable of far more than she had imagined. As she stood there, catching her breath and looking back at the path she had navigated, a sense of calm pride settled over her. She realized that courage was not about avoiding fear or difficulty. It was about facing them, step by step, and refusing to give up. The journey was far from over, but she had learned a valuable lesson. True bravery was quiet, persistent, and deeply personal. The people in the crowd began to whisper, some clapping softly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. They had come to witness her challenge, expecting failure, but what they had seen was something far more powerful. They had witnessed determination, persistence, and courage in its truest form. And though some could not fully express it, the impact of her actions was clear. She had inspired them, challenged their assumptions, and shown that bravery could exist even in the most ordinary of people. As she walked away from the path, her body exhausted but her mind clear, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced fear, mockery, and physical challenge, and she had endured. She had proven to herself that courage was not a single act, but a series of choices repeated over and over in moments of difficulty and doubt. The journey ahead would continue to test her, but she now knew that she had the strength to face whatever came next. And so, as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the town, she moved forward quietly, carrying within her a courage that could not be diminished. The challenge had not only tested her body and mind, but had revealed the depth of her inner strength. She had faced obstacles, endured judgment, and persevered, and in doing so, she had discovered a truth that would guide her for the rest of her life. Bravery was not about being fearless, it was about moving forward, despite fear and trusting oneself to overcome any obstacle. The day after her triumph began quietly, as mornings often did in the small town. But this day was different. The town's streets carried a new energy, one that had not been there before. People whispered to one another as she passed by, glancing at her with a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and something she had not seen much of before: admiration. The mockery that had once surrounded her like a shadow had begun to change. She walked slowly, taking her time, knowing that the work she had done over the past days had left an impression. She could feel the eyes on her, though she did not let them distract her. Each glance, each whisper was a quiet acknowledgement of what she had accomplished. Some people tried to mask their feelings with casual indifference, but she noticed the way their eyes followed her. Even those who had been the loudest in their ridicule could not hide the trace of respect. Grudging though it might have been, she reached a familiar path, one she had traveled many times, and paused for a moment to take in the morning light. The world seemed sharper, brighter, as if her own courage had changed the way she saw it. She thought about the journey so far, the obstacles she had faced, the fear she had confronted, and the persistence she had relied upon. It was no longer simply about overcoming a challenge. It was about what her actions had done to the people around her, whether they realized it or not. As she moved through the streets, she noticed the subtle changes in the faces she passed. Some people who had mocked her yesterday now whispered to one another, their voices low and uncertain. Others who had doubted her began to ask questions quietly, trying to understand how she had managed to endure so much. A few even stopped to offer small words of encouragement, a hesitant "well done" or a nod of approval. These gestures were different from the applause or loud praise she had never sought. They were quiet, sincere, and she accepted them with a simple nod, feeling the warmth of acknowledgement without letting it define her. The young woman's mind wandered briefly to the people who had mocked her most fiercely. Their expressions were changing too, though in a way that was more difficult to read. Some looked uncomfortable, as if realizing for the first time that their laughter had been misplaced. Others seemed uncertain, caught between their desire to maintain pride and the undeniable truth that she had shown them a kind of bravery they could not easily dismiss. She felt no gloating in her heart, only understanding. She knew that courage was not about proving others wrong. It was about remaining steadfast when faced with doubt. By mid-morning, she had reached the edge of the path where her challenge had begun. A few people had gathered, drawn not by curiosity or mockery this time, but by genuine interest. They whispered to one another, pointing quietly, sharing stories of how she had faced obstacles with determination. Even those who had initially doubted her could not resist acknowledging the truth of her actions. There was envy now in the way they spoke, quiet, subtle, but unmistakable. They wished they had the strength to act as she had. She continued along the path, aware of the shifting attention, but focused on her own thoughts. She reflected on the changes she had noticed in the town since the challenge began. What had started as mockery had slowly transformed into respect, and now into something deeper, the recognition that courage could inspire. People were no longer just watching her. They were learning from her example, realizing that facing fear and doubt was something anyone could choose, even if it felt impossible. As the day progressed, she encountered individuals who approached her hesitantly. A young person she knew from school stepped forward, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. I saw what you did," they said quietly. "I don't know how you managed it. I wish I could do that." She smiled softly, placing a gentle hand on their shoulder. "Courage isn't about being fearless," she said. "It's about doing what you can, even when you're afraid." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The young person nodded slowly, absorbing the meaning, and she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment knowing her example could help others see their own potential. Later, she noticed a small group of adults who had observed her challenge from a distance. They spoke in hushed tones, clearly impressed by her determination. "She really did it," one said. Another added, "I can't believe she kept going even when it seemed impossible." There was a subtle envy in their voices, not spiteful, but tinged with longing. They recognized the bravery required, the strength to endure criticism, and the ability to face fear without letting it dominate the mind. The young woman did not listen directly, but she sensed the shift in perception. Courage had a ripple effect, reaching beyond her immediate actions to touch the lives of those around her. Throughout the day, more people began to approach, offering small gestures of acknowledgement. A nod, a smile, a quiet word of respect. These were different from the loud applause she had never sought. They were intimate, sincere, and each one reminded her that bravery could inspire quietly, without showiness or performance. She accepted them all with humility, understanding that her actions were not about recognition, but about remaining true to herself and her own sense of purpose. By afternoon, the atmosphere in the town had changed significantly. The whispers of doubt and mockery that had once followed her were replaced with discussion and reflection. People spoke of her bravery, not as an isolated event but as a story worth sharing. Even those who had envied her could not hide their admiration, and in some cases their own desire to be more courageous. She walked through the streets noticing these subtle shifts, feeling the quiet power of her actions reverberate through the town. There were still skeptics, of course. Some shook their heads, murmuring that luck had played a role or that circumstances had been favorable. But even they could not deny the persistence, focus, and courage that had carried her through the challenge. The proof was in her actions, in the way she had faced obstacles, endured judgment, and continued despite fear. Their doubt was quiet now, softened by the undeniable truth that she had accomplished something extraordinary. She paused near a familiar landmark, the place where the challenge had first tested her resolve. The memories of fear, exhaustion, and doubt were vivid, but they no longer held power over her. She had faced each obstacle, each moment of ridicule, and had continued. And in doing so, she had not only proven her own resilience, but she had shown the town a new understanding of courage. It was quiet, personal, and transformative, capable of changing how people thought about themselves and others. A few people approached her hesitantly, unable to hide the envy in their expressions. "How did you do it?" one asked, voice low. Another added, "I've never seen anyone keep going like that. I wish I could have your strength." She looked at them gently, understanding the complexity of their feelings. "Courage isn't a gift," she said softly. "It's a choice. It's something you can decide to practice even in small ways every day." Her words were simple, but they carried the truth of her experience. The listeners nodded slowly, contemplating what she had said, and she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her example might guide them in their own moments of doubt. As the day moved toward evening, the energy of the town shifted further. Conversations about her actions replaced the gossip and mockery that had dominated before. People were inspired, not just by her bravery, but by the way she had handled herself with humility and determination. They could see that courage was not about seeking attention or praise. It was about facing fear, persevering through difficulty, and remaining true to oneself. The envy that some felt was natural, a recognition of the strength they wished they had, but it was also tempered by admiration and respect. She walked through the streets quietly, observing the subtle changes in the people around her. Children who had once ignored her now watched with interest. Adults who had doubted her now whispered about her determination, and even those who had mocked her most fiercely seemed reluctant to speak ill. The transformation was not dramatic or loud, but it was real. Her courage had created a ripple effect, touching lives and inspiring reflection in ways that she had never imagined. By the time the sun began to set, the town felt different. The energy had shifted from skepticism and mockery to acknowledgement and quiet admiration. People spoke of her in hushed tones, sharing stories of her persistence and bravery. Even those who had envied her could not hide their respect, and some were beginning to understand that courage was something they could cultivate within themselves. She walked home slowly, her body tired but her spirit calm, reflecting on the day and the changes she had witnessed. That night, as she lay down to rest, she thought about the reactions of the people around her. Mockery had turned to curiosity, curiosity had turned to admiration, and admiration had grown into envy tempered by respect. She realized that her courage had not only changed her own understanding of herself, but it had also transformed the way others saw the world. Bravery, she understood now, was contagious. It inspired, challenged, and sometimes humbled those who witnessed it. She drifted to sleep with a sense of quiet fulfillment. The journey was far from over, but she knew that her courage had made a lasting impact. The people who had mocked her might never fully admit it, but they had learned something important. Bravery was not about appearances, luck, or special talent. It was about persistence, focus, and the willingness to face fear, step by step, even when others doubted or laughed. And as the night settled over the town, she carried within her the knowledge that her actions had inspired change. Her courage had created ripples that extended beyond her own journey, touching the hearts and minds of those around her. The envy she saw in some faces was not bitterness. It was a reflection of their desire to be braver, to face their own fears, and to act with determination in moments when it seemed easier to give up. She had shown them, quietly but powerfully, what true bravery looked like. The morning sun spilled its golden light over the town, but she felt no need to rush. The last days had taught her that courage was not about speed or showiness. It was about steady steps and persistent effort. She moved through the streets slowly, noticing the quiet changes in the faces around her. People who had mocked her now offered smiles, nods, and occasional words of encouragement. Even those who had envied her seemed more thoughtful, considering their own choices and what they might do differently. She had learned that bravery could quietly change the world. Not with loud proclamations, but with repeated choices, small actions that proved the heart's strength. Today, she was not facing a physical challenge like the one before, but an internal one: reflection. She wanted to understand how much she had grown and what her actions had truly meant, not only to herself, but to the town that had watched her every step. Walking past the familiar streets, she noticed children playing and laughing. A few ran up to her, eyes wide with curiosity and admiration. "How did you do it?" one asked, voice filled with awe. She knelt down to meet their gaze, smiling softly. "I was scared," she admitted quietly, "but I kept going anyway." Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about choosing to move forward, even when fear is there. The children nodded slowly, absorbing the words. For them, she was not just a person. They were beginning to see a living example of what bravery could look like. She paused near the town square, where some of the adults had gathered. There were those who had once mocked her, those who had doubted her, and those who had quietly admired her from the start. Their expressions were different now, softened, reflective, and filled with respect. Some offered nods or tentative words of acknowledgement, while others simply observed, perhaps realizing for the first time how courage could be quietly transformative. Her journey over the past days had left her tired, but not in the way exhaustion from physical effort feels. This was a deep, satisfying tiredness, the kind that comes from facing fears, overcoming doubt, and enduring struggle. She had discovered something essential about herself. Strength was not measured by how others saw her, but by her ability to persist, remain true to her values, and act even when the world seemed to doubt her. The townspeople began to approach her more openly as the day passed. They wanted to hear her thoughts, understand her mindset, and perhaps learn how they too could face challenges in their own lives. One person said quietly, "I don't know if I could have done what you did." "I would have given up," she smiled gently. "You don't have to be fearless. Everyone is afraid. Courage is choosing to try anyway, step by step, even when it seems impossible." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of lived experience. In the afternoon, she returned to the path where her challenge had begun. She paused at the spots where obstacles had tested her courage and endurance. Each place held a memory, times of fear, moments of doubt, and small triumphs that had carried her forward. Standing there, she realized that her journey was not just about overcoming a physical path, but about understanding her own capacity to endure, adapt, and persist. It was about discovering that bravery could exist quietly inside, even when others did not notice. A few people followed her silently, observing her reflection. They had once mocked her or doubted her, but now they were learning. Watching her take the time to reflect, to appreciate the journey she had endured, they began to see that courage was not a spectacle. It was personal, internal, and transformative. It changed the one who practiced it, and slowly, it changed those around them too. She moved further along the path, pausing at a bend where the most difficult obstacle had been. The steep incline, the uneven ground, the moments when she had almost faltered, all of it was vivid in her memory. But she no longer saw it as something to fear or regret. She saw it as a testament to her own perseverance, a reflection of the inner strength she had developed. Courage, she realized, was not about reaching the end quickly, but about enduring the process fully, embracing every difficulty and every moment of doubt. As the day continued, she encountered people who sought her advice. Some wanted guidance on facing personal fears. Others were curious about her mindset. and a few simply wished to understand how she had kept moving, despite mockery and doubt. She spoke to them with honesty, not offering platitudes but sharing the lessons she had learned. It's okay to be afraid, she told them. What matters is whether you let fear stop you or whether you keep going. That choice is yours every single day. Her words were soft, but their sincerity carried far more weight than any speech or demonstration. By late afternoon, the town seemed transformed in subtle ways. Conversations were quieter, more reflective. People were speaking about courage and persistence, about facing challenges and enduring difficulties, rather than gossiping or mocking. The ripple of her actions had spread not in dramatic gestures, but in small, meaningful ways. People were beginning to see that bravery was something they could cultivate, and that it did not require grand displays, only the willingness to keep going, step by step, even when fear was present. She paused at a familiar bench in the town square, sitting quietly as the sun began to lower in the sky. She thought about all that had happened, the initial mockery, the doubt, the obstacles, and the quiet moments of triumph. Each day had taught her something new, and she realized that her journey was not only about facing external challenges, it was also about understanding herself, discovering the depths of her resilience, and recognizing the power of persistence. A few people approached, hesitant but respectful. One said quietly, "Watching you has made me think differently about my own fears. I want to try harder to face my own challenges." She smiled, placing a hand on their shoulder gently. "That's all anyone can do," she said. "Start small. Keep going. Courage grows the more you practice it." Their eyes brightened, and she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had not only faced her own fears, but had given others a path to see their own potential. As evening approached, the town seemed quieter, calmer. People moved through the streets with a new sense of reflection, many thinking about the courage they had witnessed and how it applied to their own lives. The energy of mockery and doubt that had once dominated was gone, replaced by quiet admiration and contemplation. Even those who had envied her now carried a subtle respect, tempered by the recognition that bravery was not an accident. It was a choice, a repeated practice, and a personal commitment. She walked home slowly, her steps deliberate, savoring the quiet of the evening. The streets, the paths, and the landmarks of her challenge were familiar, yet they felt different. They were no longer symbols of fear or difficulty, but reminders of growth, courage, and transformation. She understood that the journey had changed her deeply, shaping her character and revealing the strength she carried within. As night fell, she sat by the window of her home, looking out at the stars. She reflected on the lessons she had learned, that fear was natural, that mockery could be endured, and that persistence and courage were more important than immediate recognition. She thought about the people who had watched her journey unfold, some inspired, some envious, and some quietly admiring. Her actions had left an imprint on the town, showing that courage was not about public praise, but about the quiet determination to face life's challenges. She realized that the envy she had noticed in some faces was not negative. It was a reflection of their own desire to be braver, to act with persistence, and to confront their own fears. Her example had sparked something within them, a recognition of what was possible when one chooses to keep moving forward despite doubt. Courage, she understood, was contagious, not through loud demonstrations, but through consistent, deliberate actions that inspired reflection in others. Later that night, she prepared for rest, her body exhausted but her spirit calm. The journey had been difficult, demanding, and at times frightening, yet it had brought a clarity she had never known before.